Welcome back to the Nick Bartlett Show, everybody. The football show where a former bench warmer basketball player breaks down some of today's college football games. And we're still in the midst of interviewing media and other personnel from Super West teams in relation to their non-conference opponents. So for today's show, we're going to be doing the Washington State-Wisconsin matchup. And joining me on the show today is Colten Bartholomew of BadgerExtra and with the Wisconsin State Journal. So thank you for coming on the show, Colten.
Yeah, anytime, Nick. No problem.
And today we got a rematch of a game that no one is exactly quite sure how it happened, but it did. Obviously, the Cougs somehow went into Wisconsin or went into Madison and beat the Badgers last year. I'm sure Badger fans, Wisconsin fans, and Colten probably feel some sort of way about it. So obviously the rematch this year is in the Palouse down in Pullman. So yeah, let's get straight to the questions. And something tells me that Wisconsin, they're probably going to be a bit ready for revenge. So first thing we're going to start with here today is how is the fan base reacting to the change in culture with Wisconsin football hiring Luke Fickell?
Yeah, I think there's mostly excitement when you talk about what the fans are expecting because there's been a long time for the Badgers that they've kind of been set in this way, like we have to win with a powerful running game and leaning on the defense, and kind of that's been the culture and the identity of the program. And I think Fickell, being a quote-unquote outsider, he's a Midwest guy, but an outsider in terms of Wisconsin, comes in and says, well, we can win a different way. You can do other things. And he obviously hit the transfer portal really hard and kind of recalibrated this offense and this roster to be able to do that. So I think the fans are really excited to see what a new system is going to bring to this offense. And then on defense, how they can mix what Cincinnati was really good at with their passing defense and some of the schemes that they've got with a 3-3-5 defense. With what Jim Leonhard was doing at Wisconsin, which was really successful and one of the best run defenses in the country as well. So there's a lot of excitement, and I think everyone's kind of looking at, that Wisconsin opens the season with Buffalo, but then they're looking at this Washington State game as kind of like okay, prove yourself. You've got, kind of like you mentioned, the revenge on your mind here, but then also like first Power 5 opponent. Like, let's see it on the field. Let's see it work.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, WSU has been, I know that's not the biggest brand nationally, but they have been decent enough over the last decade or so, consistently making bowl games and things like that ever since Mike Leach took over. So definitely a formidable opponent. So I'm kind of hopping down over here to the actual kind of on the field stuff. Do you have just kind of some initial thoughts on Tanner Mordecai? Anything? Just any initial thoughts on him?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's the type of quarterback that's going to be successful in an offense like this. He ran something similar, not exactly the same thing, but something similar down at SMU. His 2 seasons down there, he was, through 72 touchdowns as a starting quarterback for the Mustangs. So I think just having a guy that's a little bit more experienced in this type of offense than maybe some of his teammates are is a pretty big deal for the Badgers. And I think when you look at Mordecai's attitude, he's just kind of ready for this moment in terms of he's proven himself to be a successful quarterback in college, but now he wants to do it at the Power 5 level. He looked at going into the pros last season after 5 seasons in college, and basically the feedback he got was, hey, we need to see you be successful against Power 5 teams. And if you kind of look at his splits, like when they win, he's had really big games, and when they've lost, it's not been as pretty. So I think this is a really interesting test for not just him as an individual, but this offense and the ability to take a guy with this talent and put him against new competition and try to make it work. So I think Mordecai is the type of quarterback that's got the attitude and the personality to make it work. And now it's just putting all the stuff that you need to off the field, onto the field, and making it as successful as you can in your 1 year at Wisconsin.
Yeah, and I didn't realize he actually had taken a look at the NFL previously. That's, I guess, maybe why we do these things a little bit here. I mean, I knew he threw for over, 7,000 yards at SMU or something ridiculous. I didn't realize he kind of took a little glimpse of the NFL. Moving over to, obviously, what can you say? It's been Wisconsin O-line's always been dominant. Do you kind of feel they'll be as dominant as usual? And the one caveat is WSU really does have a really good they have 2 really good defensive ends. So you feel that Wisconsin offensive line will be able to control the game a bit?
Well, I think that was honestly the biggest wake-up call of this team last season was the fact that they didn't push Wisconsin or Washington State off the line. And when you go back and look at why they weren't successful on offense, is that for long stretches of the game, the running game wasn't there, and that was really the only way that this team can move the ball. in the last couple of years. So I think that the Washington State game served as a wake-up call to this offensive line that you're not just going to show up and push people around. Like, you've got to put the work in. And I think that there's been a little bit of that in the last few years at Wisconsin, that the line's never been in full bad, but it hasn't been that same elite, like, just maul everybody offensive line that people associate with Wisconsin. This new system is going to change some things up for them. I think the fact that they're not going to see 7, 8, 9-man boxes every single snap is going to help them a ton. Because I talked to guys on and off the record over the last year, just the amount of frustration that you get to, middle of the third quarter, you're on your 50th play, let's say, as an offense, and it's the same outnumbered box that you basically need some luck to happen or a broken tackle for you to have any success. You kind of just know that going up to the line. Like, that really wore on these guys mentally. So I think this new system, spreading out defenses, creating some space in the middle of the field that they can attack with some quicker handoffs. Not everything's going to be relying on the offensive line to move guys 3 or 4 yards off the ball. They're still going to want to do these things and get up to the second level, but I think the offense just isn't going to be so reliant on them being able to do that. So I think this Washington State matchup is going to be a really good test for them, because they get a little appetizer with Buffalo, just not the same size and skill that Washington State has up in the front seven. Not as well coached either. I think that's one of the things that Jamie Dicker doesn't get as much credit as he deserves. Is he's always put out a defense that's maybe not been excellent, but it's been pretty good, and he's doing that again at Washington State.
Yeah, no, for sure. The Cougars, as long as I've been doing this whole, I guess we're Super West Sports, so we do more than Pac-12, but I was covering more Pac-12 recently, or last couple of years, and yeah, the Cougars have never had a good defense before Dicker came. They're all right because of Leach in the offense, but yeah, so no, that's should be kind of interesting to see if he can, at least if they can hold their own against Wisconsin, because I do feel that the Badgers, I know that you just said maybe the offensive line isn't quite what we expect over the last decade. But it's hard for me to imagine that they won't come in with some sort of intrinsic motivation and kind of put WSU, quickly remind them who they are. But that's just how I feel a little bit. And first off, thank you for following my last question, because I threw about 3 at you. I'll make this one a little bit simpler. How good is the running back combination of Ches Malusi and Braylon Allen?
Yeah, it's up there with among the best in the country, I believe. You look at the Michigans of the world. I know Georgia's basically got a stable of backs that's going to be hard to match, I think. But as long as Allen and Malusi stay healthy, I think Wisconsin's got a 1-2 punch that's as good as anybody's. The fact that Braylon Allen's continued to grow as a running back, he came in, his backstory is pretty impressive. Being a 17-year-old freshman, graduated early, a full year early, reclassified in the summer back in 2021. So he comes in early, basically has to learn actually playing running back as opposed to the best athlete on the field that gets handed the ball. That's what I always joke about. In high school, yeah, he was just the biggest, strongest, fastest guy. So, yeah, he ran everybody over. But now he had to learn how to play the position for real. And he did that on the fly at Wisconsin, basically in game 4 of his freshman year, became the lead running back. And it's just been an upward progression ever since. So I think this season he's really excited to see what an offense that's not so run reliant looks like, not having to run into those heavy boxes like I mentioned before, but then try to show a little bit more of what he is as a receiver. Because I went back and looked through every target that he got as a receiver. I believe it's 15 of the 19 were at least on target. He had a chance to catch, and then he just didn't have a whole lot of room because every route was basically a little flat route or a little swing out of the backfield. So he never got a chance to really run too many routes or show what he could do there. I know he's excited about that opportunity in this offense. And then you add in the combination with him and Malusi. Malusi's a guy that came from Clemson, transferred to Wisconsin back in 21, knows what winning at the highest level looks like. And he's always wanted to be a part of that and try to bring that to Wisconsin. Obviously it hasn't quite happened for him, but you don't see too many seniors that transferred somewhere that are accepting of being technically a number 2. They talk about being a 1A and 1B. Both of those guys do. But I think his attitude and maturity with letting Allen become the lead guy has really set the tone for this whole offense, trying to set the egos aside. So I think those two guys, as long as they stay healthy, it really is going to be the engine to this offense. And everything that they do passing-wise, whether it's RPO, some of those quick play action type of deals, or even some of the deep shots when the defense starts playing up, are really going to be based on what they do in the backfield.
Yeah, and I mean, it does take a sense, a bit of I'm blanking on the word, just a bit of humbleness is probably the word. Because yeah, I mean, like you touched on, I mean, Malusi could realistically probably start for most schools around the country, but Braylon Allen could realistically be one of the best halfbacks in the country. So it's just that fine line. So that does kind of probably going to bode well for the team chemistry. And I just know that from firsthand. I'm a very low-level basketball coach, and I had a player who I called Michael Jordan because he was good, and he probably made me look a little bit good because I don't know what I'm doing out there half the time. And but we had another player, and exactly like you were saying, kind of the Malusi role. He's willing to take less shots, play defense, and it just helped. It seemed like the team got along better. I don't know what it did for the wins losses, but it helped the culture be better for sure. So I think we've kind of touched on a lot of the offense here. We've gone for a little bit. I think. Do you have a favorite? The original question was, do you have a favorite out of the transfer receivers? I'm just going to make it a little more generic. Do you just have kind of a favorite receiver in general?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, pretty much every transfer receiver that they brought in this winter is going to play. And I think that's a real rarity when you look at just the volume that they brought in. The fact that all of these guys are going to have a role is pretty interesting. But the way that Bryson Green, the Oklahoma State transfer, has come on here in the fall, he was a guy that was dealing with a shoulder injury back in the spring, so he didn't get to do any practices, was basically running around on the side, catching balls from the jug machine, stuff like that. But in the fall, it's just been a highlight show. Pretty much every practice we've got to see. You take his pads off, and he doesn't look as big as, he looks when he's got his pads on the field. But just the physicality he plays with as a receiver, his play strength in general, his ability to make contested catches are all things that are just really rare at Wisconsin. You go back to like 2019, the last time this program was really good and went to the Rose Bowl. They had Quintez Cephas, who was that way, who wasn't the fastest guy out there, or wasn't, didn't maybe jump the highest, but every time he threw the ball his way, he was coming down with it. I think Green's got that type of ability, but with some more explosiveness and higher level of athleticism. So I think he's a guy, maybe he's like half a hair above what CJ Williams, the USC transfer, is looking like, because I think he's got that same ability. They're going to be trading reps a lot, and then I think if there's any type of injury, one of those guys will be the immediate starter opposite each other. They'll figure it out. So I think both of those guys are going to have great seasons, but overall, if I had to pick one, I think Bryson Green's going to be the guy that just jumps off the page for Wisconsin.
Yeah, and if Bryson Green can kind of maybe provide some level of stability with kind of this, I don't know exactly what you call it, change from maybe a more traditional running offense to, like an air raid system. So maybe just provide some stability in that transition, because that's quite a jump, regardless of how talented these football players. Obviously, these are D1 players who experience, but that's a big difference. So, I think we pretty much touched on Wisconsin offense. I just want to ask you, is there anything else I missed? I know I didn't mention a tight end or anything else you'd like to add.
Yeah, I mean, tight end's going to be, I think, kind of forgettable this year, just because they've got a bunch of injuries and a couple of guys that were supposed to be seniors here that didn't report to camp. One medically retired due to injuries, and the other one we haven't heard from yet. So I think tight end's going to be, you go back and look through offensive coordinator Phil Longo's history, there always seems to be one position that just doesn't get as much involved in the offense. I think tight end is going to be that spot this year. So maybe not going to expect a ton there, but I just think that this offense, you always hear about belief and teams buying into the system you're doing. I don't think you're going to see a team that's more bought in and more excited about the type of offense they're running, because it is such a departure, like you mentioned, than Wisconsin this year.
Yeah, that's interesting, because that could go either way. And so I know we've been talking about Wisconsin kind of majority here, just for kind of, I know we got some WSU fans obviously on the Super West kind of brand. So before we hop to the defensive questions, just kind of want to throw out some quick things on WSU. So they returned 4 starters on the offensive line, which that may not mean a lot because their offensive line wasn't really that good last year. I think a lot of pundits feel that the passing attack is going to be improved. The Cougs got a new offensive coordinator in Ben Arbuckle. He did a great job at Western Kentucky, but if you're looking at the Cougs this year, WSU lost all 4 of their top receivers. You're talking about an O-line that wasn't that good last year, so I understand that people are excited about Arbuckle. For me, that doesn't make – I don't really see how WSU's pass offense could be that much improved, actually maybe a little bit worse. And the Cougars actually may need to rely on Nakia Watson, former Badger, and Jalen Jenkins out of the backfield. But again, if they're also shifting to a kind of pass-heavy offense, they may get lost in the shuffle there. So that's kind of bit on the Cougs there before we hop over back to the Wisconsin side of things. And I guess one final thing is WSU also has a new defensive coordinator in Jeff Schmedding. So there is a lot of turnover there as well. But back to Wisconsin. On the defense side of the ball here, defense returned 8 starters. Pretty generic question. What should we just expect out of a new defensive coordinator, Mike Tressel? And I know Wisconsin's defense fell a tiny bit last year, but do you think you can get them back to kind of that elite standards?
Yeah, I think last year was finally the culmination of having to be on the field because it was very veteran laden defense last year as well. But just the fact that they had to be on the field as much as they were, I think it was a totality of the last 3 years. I think things just kind of fell off because of how much that defense was on the field. So theoretically, maybe they're playing with a lead more often this year and it improves a little bit. But I think the biggest difference is going to be that Mike Tressel likes to confuse offenses pre-snap in terms of moving defenders around, having different fronts, having different looks, where Jim Leonard was really like, all right, we're going to give you the same look 15 plays in a row, but then do 15 different things off of it. So it's just a different mentality and a way to attack offenses. I think it's going to work pretty well. I think a lot of the things that Wisconsin was doing well recruiting-wise on defense work well with what Mike Tressel likes to do up front. They've had to do a ton of work on the back end, especially at cornerback, kind of remaking that room on the fly. They had some losses after the spring practices in terms of transfers out. They brought some guys in. They're working on one, Michael Mack, who is an Air Force transfer, that they're waiting on a waiver for him. So if he can play, it'd be a nice depth piece for him, but they're not sure yet if he's going to be able to play. In general, I think this defense is going to be really aggressive up front and then really rely on pressure to create some turnovers. And they put their cornerbacks in man coverage quite a bit, and they're really trusting them to stay tight and then jump on a pass when the pressure comes, and maybe they get a couple of errant passes. I think safety Hunter Wohler is the guy to really look for in terms of that because they're putting him all over the field, trying to get him in spots where he can create turnovers. So I think those are the things that Mike Tressel brings, just a little bit of a different way of attacking and then putting a guy like Hunter Wohler around the ball as much as possible.
Yeah, and without cheating on my notes here, wasn't Wohler out? He got injured last year, right?
Yeah, he got injured in the first game against Illinois State and missed, 6 games? 6 games after that. So, yeah, he wasn't in there against Washington State last year.
Yeah, could have. You never know how that could have impacted the game. You just never know. One player can change things a little more than people seem to realize. And so, we only got a couple questions here on the defense. Not going to go as in depth on the offense. But how do you feel the pass rush will look, considering the loss of Keanu Benton? Yeah,
Benton and Nick Herbig, the outside linebacker, are their 2 best pass rushers last season. So I think what the pass rush looks like is going to be my biggest question of the first month or so, because is it going to have to be new outside linebackers that figure it out? Is it going to be the inside linebackers on blitzes that become their main pass rushers? If you go back and look at what Mike Tressel did at Cincinnati last year, Ivan Pace was their lead pass rusher from the inside linebacker spot. So it's a really interesting question. I just think that they're not going to lean on one guy to try to make all these things happen in the backfield. I think it's going to kind of be an aggregate. There's probably 3 or 4 outside linebackers that they're going to lean on and trust. There's at least 3 inside linebackers that they're going to play quite a bit. So I'm not sure if it's going to be one guy. I think in an ideal world, Tressel has 5-6 guys that have 3 or 4 sacks at the end of the season, and an offense really can't load up against anybody. But I think the pass rush, I don't know if it's a question mark because I believe they're going to get pressure. I just don't know who it's going to be from yet.
Yeah, maybe a team effort. And maybe if one guy kind of emerges, draws a double team, makes it a little bit easier on the rest of the bunch.
Right.
So looking at, we got do you feel this kind of blanket statement? I think it's maybe an easy answer here, but do you feel like the linebackers are kind of the strongest defensive unit?
Yeah, no doubt, because I think top line, their corners and safeties are pretty solid. I just don't think they quite have the depth that they do at the linebacker spots. Because like I mentioned, they have 4 outside linebackers that I think they feel comfortable starting. So I think a lot of them are going to play a lot of snaps. And then inside linebacker, they've got Muma Jungmeadow coming off an all-conference season last season. And then Jordan Turner and Jake Chaney are 2 guys that have played outstanding football in camp. And they got put with one of those OR designations on the depth chart right now. So I think that's just a reflection that both those guys are going to play a ton. It just might be one guy gets this situation, and the other guy gets the other. Like however it ends up, like they want them on the field as much as they can.
Yeah, definitely. And we got just one or two more football questions, and I think just one more kind of random question that I always got to ask everyone. So appreciate your time here. We'll get you out here in about 5 minutes. And then the last question, kind of football heavy stuff. I wasn't really able to find a lot of information on the secondary. I saw that they got a safety transfer from Boston College. Corner could be all right, Alexander Smith, but I wasn't able to find too much. Any names I should know?
Yeah, you mentioned the transfer from Boston College. Jason Maitre is actually going to be the nickelback. He's going to be their slot corner. He played a ton of different positions at Boston College. You mentioned safety. That's what he played as a senior there. I think he's really excited to get locked into one spot and really hone in on it. And he sees a future for himself in the pros at nickel corner. So I think he's in for a really big season if he stays healthy. You mentioned Alexander Smith, another 6-year senior, a ton of experience there, playing the boundary corner spot, which in Luke Fickell's defense, that was the Sauce Gardner spot. So it's a position where you're going to be put in man coverage a lot. You're going to get chances to make some plays, get plays on the ball because you're going to be one-on-one a lot. So it's a position of a lot of trust. And then on the field corner side, Ricardo Hallman was a former 4-star recruit. They've had a lot of belief in, a lot of high hopes. Had a really tough game against Michigan State last year in the double overtime loss. Led up the tying touchdown regulation and the winning touchdown in double overtime. So it was a situation where they kind of pulled the reins back on him, didn't want his confidence to get too hurt after a tough showing. And now all throughout the offseason, he's been the number one guy at that field corner spot. So expect to see a lot out of him. I mentioned Hunter Wohler earlier at safety, and then a couple of guys that are returning from last season are Kamoy Latu at safety, and then Travion Blaylock as well. So they've got a few guys that they feel really comfortable with. I'm just not sure how deep any of those positions are. It's just going to have to be, I think, in that first month of the year, figuring out which guys they can trust, how much they can play while not giving up too much defensively, and then, what that split looks like going into conference season.
Yeah, and as we touched on earlier, I mean, WSU lost all four of their receivers, so it may give I should say their leading receivers. It should give Wisconsin secondary a bit of kind of leeway to figure out these new guys. I'm not going to be sold on these transfers from the Group of Five school until they do it. Granted, they could be superstars, but I got to see it first before I give them a little bit of credit. So 2 questions here. One is pretty simple. Do you got, it's a little early, but do you got like a light game prediction, or are you ready for just a full-on game prediction?
I'd go more long game. I would say if Wisconsin's not in Indianapolis playing for the Big Ten championship, I think something went wrong in terms of an injury. I just look at the West. It's the last season of divisional play here in the Big Ten. I just think they've got the most talent. They've got a coaching staff that I think is up for the challenge here, and they know what kind of momentum they need to build to continue getting Wisconsin going in the right direction as the Big Ten expands and it gets even harder. So I think if they're not in Indianapolis, it's a pretty big disappointment. So whether that means they need to go 10-2 or 11-1, maybe even, like whatever that ends up looking like, if they're not playing for a Big Ten championship, I think they'd be pretty disappointed in themselves come December.
Fair. Yeah, that makes sense. I'll do the opposite. I'll do the short form. So what I'm thinking is, had WSU, this is going to hurt a lot of Cougar fans, probably not likely been demoted to the Mountain West, or it hasn't been official yet, but it's probably happening. I think this would have been an absolute decimation. I think Wisconsin would have went to the Palouse and literally won like 40-17. I think with kind of the added anger around the Cougars program at Pullman, I'm taking a wild guess they're probably pretty angry over there. I'm going to still say Wisconsin wins, but I'm going to say like 30-20. I think the Cougars are going to give them a little fight, but I just don't think they have enough, particularly with the result last year.
Yeah, I really think that Wisconsin went into that game last year thinking that they're going to physically outman the Washington State. I don't think they're going to make that mistake again. So I'm with you. I think it'll be a fairly competitive game. But I just don't think Wisconsin's going to overlook them at all. Like I think they fell into that trap a little bit last season.
Yeah, no, I think we're on the same page a little bit here. So I got one. You got time for 1 or 2 questions here on the way out. All right, cool. First one, pretty simple. Ask everyone, and then the second one's kind of random. Obviously, you cover football. Do you have a favorite sport outside of football, or is it football all the day, all the time?
I mean, I played football in college. I mean, that's play is a generous verb, but I was there. So football most of the time. I love golf too. That's my secondary beat here at the State Journal. So I love covering golf, and there's a senior PGA event that comes to Madison every year. So that's pretty cool to be able to watch those guys play for a whole weekend. So that's my second sport here at work.
Nice. That's a nice little balance. You got the physicality of football and the golf, which is really a heavily mentally kind of mentally. I'm forgetting the word here, but it's a mental game. And then kind of the last question I always got to ask. Obviously, I'm not sure why they gave me a show, but since they did, I'm fitting this in here. I loved WWE wrestling as a kid. Still love it as an adult. Not gonna lie. Do you have a favorite wrestler, or is it just a little bit too nerdy for you?
No, by far the Undertaker, greatest wrestler of all time in my opinion. I watch more AEW these days. I was not as into it as used to be, but love the Undertaker, and I love the fact that he's actually out doing interviews and stuff now. So we actually get like the stories, because it used to be you just never heard from him if it wasn't in character and on TV. So it's great watching the Undertaker renaissance here in the last 5 years.
Yeah, I know he's been doing a little kind of like virtual comedy too, and yeah, it's interesting you say that. I would like to watch a little more AEW. AEW, I actually feel it's a little bit better, pure quality, just wrestling. But I know this is a football podcast, so I won't go too far down that right now. But yeah, unless you got anything else, Colton, thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, no problem, Nick.
And all right, guys, seems like we both got Wisconsin. They're not going to fall asleep against WSU this year. Looks like we both got the Badgers winning fairly easily. We're not going to, neither of us said necessarily a blowout, but definitely on the easier side for sure. So this has been the Nick Bartlett Show. Thank you guys for tuning in, and let your energy speak.